Though Arcane is a relatively young story, its cultural impact cannot be understated. It is literally the most expensive animated production ever created, costing $250 million for just 18 episodes. Within its release, it was the top Netflix show in 85 countries. In 2022, it won 4 Emmys. But Arcane had more than just visuals. It had a gripping and visceral story that was so universally praised that the series' first season rests on the whopping 100% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 30 reviews, as well as 96% audience score, based on over 5,000 reviews. While the bulk of the praise is indeed for the stunning visuals, practically the same amount of praise has been given to the writing, world building, lore, characters, and voice acting.
Viktor Nation, how are we feeling? Jayce, JB, or JB not?
And all this for a story based on League of Legends, of all things. Though while one of the goals of Arcane was precisely to draw new players into the game, it did not necessarily work. Still, given how the industry tends to treat animation as a lesser form of art than live action, the cultural juggernaut that Arcane became certainly opens many doors for the future of Western animation. I have no doubt that Arcane broke the mold and will become a classic in the years to come, if it hadn't become one already, to be honest, but Season 2 was, suffice to say, a mixed bag. It is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with 100% approval rating, but the audience score dropped to 89%, and the ending received some, well-warranted in my opinion, criticism, usually pertaining to the pacing and some mishandling of various storylines. Some of it is not really the fault of the writing and production team, as the show was originally planned to last 5 seasons, but was cut into 2 for what seems to be practical reasons. Animating Arcane was an extremely time-consuming and tedious tenure, with Season 2 taking 3 years to animate, so the cut in seasons was, to some degree, reasonable and expected. Unfortunately, this meant that practically all storylines had to be cut or condensed, and while it would be understandable to not delve into all the side plots the show introduced, the biggest problem Arcane encountered is that it never bothered to resolve the main conflict of the story. Before we start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to this on Spotify if you prefer. Check the link in the description. And in case it wasn't clear, watch out for spoilers for both seasons of Arcane. To briefly recap the basic plot of this story. Arcane takes place broadly in 2 locations. The utopian city of Piltover and its oppressed underbelly, the Undercity, also known as Zaun. The story focuses on Vi and Powder, 2 sisters who lost their parents to the failed Zaunite rebellion. Vi and Powder are taken in by Vander, a leader of the uprising. Some years later, Vi, Powder and their adopted brothers, Milo and Klager, break into Piltover residence to steal some goodies, and Powder encounters a strange blue crystal. When she accidentally shatters one, it causes an explosion. They run back into the Undercity, but are attacked by local thugs and Powder loses the loot. Vander manages to placate the enforcers, the police force of Piltover. At the same time, Silco, Vander's former best friend with whom he had a violent falling out, tests a new drug called Shimmer that mutates the body of whoever gets injected by it. The crystals Powder stole belonged to Jayce Talis, an aspiring scientist at the Piltover Academy. Jayce wishes to use the mysterious arcane magic to improve Piltover's technology due to being saved by it when he was a child. However, he gets expelled for tampering with dangerous magic. Viktor, another scientist originally from the Undercity, our beloved Harry Lloyd in this role, decides to aid Jayce in his experiments. With the shielding of the Consular medarda, Viktor and Jayce invent Hextech, a potent element that can be used to power technology with magic. The incident the children caused make the Zonids wish to once more fight against Piltover, but Vander insists on staying neutral. To protect Vi and Powder, Vander decides to take responsibility for the incident, but is instead captured by Silco, who inject one of the Zonids with Shimmer and made him into a mutated weapon. Vi, Milo and Clagger decide to save Vander, but Vi forbids Powder from going with them. While the siblings manage to locate Vander and almost save him, Powder accidentally causes an explosion that kills Milo and Clagger. Vander takes Shimmer in order to protect Vi and dies in the process. When Vi learns that Powder caused the explosion, she hits her and calls her a jinx. Silco then approaches Powder and consoles her, but before Vi can intervene like she planned to, she is arrested by one of the enforcers, Marcus. Several years down the line, Hextech causes Piltover to prosper, though there are still doubts about the dangers of the arcane nature of it. Powder, who now goes by Jinx, smuggles Shimmer for Silco, whom she now sees as a father. The operation gets interrupted by the Firelights, another Zonid gang led by Ekko, once a friend to Vander's children. When Jinx mistakes one of them for Vi, she has a violent breakdown and kills most of them. She then steals Jayce's gemstone and causes an explosion in Piltover that kills several enforcers. Jayce becomes one of the consulators to protect the city from Jinx and orders a blockade, fueling tensions between two cities. Caitlyn, a daughter of the Kiramann consular, investigates the crime scene of the recent Firelights fight. Curious about the incident, Caitlyn visits the Stillwater prison, where she encounters Vi. Together, they track down Silco. In Piltover, Viktor's illness starts getting increasingly worse, and he plans to cure it using Hextech, and Jayce assists him in that. Heimerdinger, one of the consulators and the dean of the academy, forbids Jayce from continuing the experiment, so Jayce orchestrates his removal from the council. Vi and Caitlyn learn of Jinx's allegiance to Silco. Meanwhile, Jinx manages to use Jayce's gemstone to create a device similar to Hextech. Jinx and Vi reunite, but Jinx is mistrustful of Caitlyn, and they do not manage to make up. The Firelights steal the gemstone and abduct Vi and Caitlyn. Following Vander's death, Silco made the population of the undercity addicted to Shimmer, but Ekko and the Firelights work to build a community of refugees. Viktor uses a variant of Shimmer to cure his illness. Jinx kills more enforcers. Ekko and Jinx fight, and she detonates an explosive, which leads to Jinx having severe injuries. Jinx did recover the gemstone, however. Vi and Caitlyn flee to Piltover. Silco has Jinx injected with Shimmer to save her life. Meanwhile, Ambessa, Mel's mother, originally from Noxus, arrives at Piltover to give aid with the upcoming war with Zaun. Heimerdinger meets Ekko and Viktor heals his body through the hex core, but the experiment accidentally kills his friend Sky. Vi and Jayce team up to destroy Silco's Shimmer factories, but Jayce accidentally kills a child. At the same time, Caitlyn gets kidnapped by Jinx. Jayce brokers a peace deal with Silco. In exchange for Jinx, he will grant Zaun independence. Viktor orders Jayce to destroy the hex core. Vi is abducted by Jinx and is made to choose between her and Caitlyn. Jinx has a breakdown and accidentally shoots Silco, who tells her that he would not turn her into Piltover, even in exchange for independence. Jinx then fires a rocket to the Piltover Council, as they approve Zaun's independence. Here's where Season 1 ends. In Season 2, Jayce and Mel survive the attack, but Caitlyn's mother is killed. Viktor is also heavily wounded, and to save him, Jayce fuses his body with the hex core. Piltover immediately prepares for retaliation, but Mel opposes the use of Hextech. To avoid a full-blown war, Caitlyn offers to instead locate Jinx and neutralize the producers of Shimmer. At the memorial for the fallen consulars, the Piltovans get attacked. Vi agrees to help with locating Jinx, putting on an enforcer's badge. Some Zonids want to turn Jinx in, but Sevica, once Silco's second-in-command, refuses. Caitlyn and her team gas the streets of Zaun, but fail to locate Jinx, who meets an orphan named Isha. Viktor awakes from a coma, and when he realizes that Jayce hadn't destroyed the hex core, he parts ways with him. As he returns to Zaun, he realizes that the hex core gave him healing powers, which inspires him to create a cult. When Heimerdinger and Ekko discover that the tree in the Firelight's hideout has signs of magical corruption, they consult Jayce on the issue. Ambessa survives an assassination attempt on herself by the Black Rose, a group of Noxian sorcerers, who in turn kidnap Mel. Jayce, Ekko, and Heimerdinger discover an arcane anomaly known as the Wild Rune. Vi and Caitlyn locate Jinx, who fights them off together with Sevica, and the fight gets interrupted when Isha shields Jinx with her own body. Sevica, Isha, and Jinx flee, detonating bombs to cover their escape, which damages Zaun's air ducts and spreads gas throughout Piltover. Caitlyn abandons Vi, and Ambessa convinces the Piltovans to declare martial law, with Caitlyn as commander-in-chief. Nobody is aware that Ambessa was behind the memorial attack. Singed, Silco's former employee, creates a wolf-human hybrid. Piltover and Nexus forces began the occupation of Zaun, but Jinx has gone into hiding with Isha, and Jayce, Ekko and Heimerdinger go missing. Caitlyn grows suspicious of Ambessa, who wants to use the Hex tech against the Black Rose. Jinx is now seen by the Zaunites as a hero, and Sevica tries to convince her to lead a revolt. Jinx refuses, but when Isha is captured at the rally, she and Sevica break into Stillwater prison to save her. Singed is also arrested, but leaves a blood trail so that the beast he created can follow him. Jinx fights the creature as Sevica and Isha flee. As the creature is about to kill Jinx, he recognizes powder in her. It turns out that the beast was created using Vander's body. Jinx reunites with Vi and convinces her to follow her to meet with the mutated Vander. While he attacks them at first, he does eventually recognize his daughters. Meanwhile, Ambessa offers Singed to work for her, and Caitlyn realizes that the reason he was conducting these experiments was to cure his ill daughter. Meanwhile, Mel finds herself in the Black Rose prison, where she reunites with her brother Kino, previously presumed dead. Kino tells her that Ambessa had an illegitimate child that the Black Rose tries to locate, and Mel realizes that he's just an illusion, with her latent magical powers getting unleashed. Jayce returns and meets with Salo, a man who was left disabled in the wake of Jinx's attack on the council, but was healed by Viktor. Jayce vows to destroy Hextech and kills Salo. Jinx, Isha and Vi ask Viktor to heal Vander, but unbeknownst to them, Singed, Caitlyn and Ambessa track them down. Caitlyn captures Vi, but they team up once more and defeat both Singed and Ambessa. Jayce sneaks into the scene and kills Viktor, which causes Vander to become wild again. Isha sacrifices herself to save Jinx from being killed by the frenzied Vander. At the same time, Ekko and Heimerdinger find themselves in an alternate universe, where the explosion at the beginning of Season 1 actually killed Vi, which changed the events so that Milo and Klager are still alive, and Hextech was never invented. In this world, Jinx is still Powder, and is a fairly well-adjusted individual that is dating Ekko. And with her help, Heimerdinger and Ekko create a time reversal device. In spite of developing feelings for Powder, Ekko decides to return to his timeline, and does so with Heimerdinger sacrificing himself for him. Parallel to this, Jayce gets transported to a post-apocalyptic reality, where Hextech destroyed Piltover, revealing that it's Viktor's fault. When he is transported back to his timeline, this is what prompts him to kill Viktor, but Singed uses Vander's remains to keep Viktor alive. Caitlyn and Jinx put their enmity behind, with Jinx acknowledging her guilt in killing Caitlyn's mother, and Caitlyn acknowledging that she no longer hates Jinx. Mel escapes the Black Rose's prison and reunites with Jayce, revealing that her secret magical powers saved them from being killed during Jinx's attack. Viktor's emissary arrives and requests access to the Hex core that would help him accomplish the goal of glorious evolution. When Jayce denies him, Viktor allies with Ambessa and attacks Piltover. Jinx decides to break the cycle of violence, mirroring Silco's earlier words to her. Jayce calls for Piltover and the Undercity to ally and defeat Ambessa and Viktor. Jinx and Ekko arrive to help with the battle. Ambessa dies, but Viktor manages to access the wild rune of the Hex core, putting everyone but Ekko in a state of hypnosis. However, Ekko defeats Viktor with the use of his time-traveling device. Jayce then manages to convince Viktor to stop his plans. They destroy the wild rune together and their physical forms disappear. Jinx seemingly sacrifices herself to protect Vi from Vander, with the implication that she might have survived. In the end, Sevica becomes Zaun representative on the council, Mel returns to Noxus, and Singed cures his daughter. The end. The question that you probably ask, what about Piltover and Zaun? Well, nothing about Piltover and Zaun. And that's the problem. According to league lore, Piltover and Zaun were once united, but were separated due to an accident that caused Zaun to be partially buried underground, killing thousands of citizens and leaking poisonous gas in the surrounding area. The gas was blown away by the wind spirit Janna, prompted by the prayers of the Zaunites. Zaun was eventually rebuilt, and its control of water transport caused the merchant class to immensely prosper and build Piltover over Zaun. The new place soon rose to be the city of progress and innovation, building many factories over Zaun, causing air pollution and leading to illness and disability of its citizens. Thus, the Zaunites were directly suffering for the progress and innovation of Piltover, with the growing class divide only adding fuel to the fire. In stories of this sort, it's common for the creators to opt for more fantastical and over-the-top oppression allegories, often to poor result. So I, for one, am glad that the creators of Arcane went for the ever-universal theme of class divide. It's also why I believe that The Hunger Games is still so popular and influential. The underlying theme is that of class divide, with the games itself only being one of its manifestations. One small group directly benefits from the oppression of another group of people, keeping the oppressed group in scarcity and misery, all while the privileged ones reap endless benefits. Sounds all too familiar, doesn't it? It's also why so many of the dystopian works created in the wake of the Hunger Games craze never worked quite as well and largely faded into obscurity. Rather to recognize the inner workings and nuances of systems of oppression, its authors saw some peculiar element of the world building and based the story around it. Say, in Divergent, the main character is targeted by the oppressive government because she has more than one personality trait, which serves as commentary for just about nothing, especially since it turns out that she is just a normal human being and people with one personality trait are a result of a failed experiment. Upon watching Season 1, I was positively surprised at the care the writers took in constructing the system of oppression faced by the Zonids. They seemed to fully understand that oppression requires one group being a beneficiary of benefits at the expense of another group. Sometimes that was very obvious, like the brutality the enforcers displayed towards Zonids, but often it was shown to us in more intricate ways, such as the set design, like the pipes that dump toxic waste into Zaun, or the fact that Zonids are not granted the same protections in the court of law as citizens of Piltover. Jayce is able to explain himself to the council when he is accused of breaking the law, whereas Vi, a child, is thrown into prison for years with no trial. This is also done with nuance, since not all Zonids are angels, best exemplified by Silco, whose dream of independent Zaun led him to become a gang leader and team up with Singed to create Shimmer, a mutative drug that makes the Zonids dependent on it, only furthering their misery, all in effort to create an army that will be capable of defeating Piltover. That is why it was so disappointing for Season 2 to throw it all out of the window. Following the debut of Season 2, Christian Link, the creator of Netflix's Arcane, says he drew inspiration from the US two-party political system and how they struggle to communicate with each other. Imagine how tired we are. I said at the beginning that the show did not bother to resolve the Zaun versus Piltover conflict, but the more apt description of what happened is that they decided to push that conflict to the side by invoking the nebulous cycle of violence. It's a creative decision that seems like a safe cop-out from the heavier themes of Season 1. Most importantly, like most of the invocations of the cycle of violence in fiction, it failed spectacularly to actually apply it. Don't get me wrong, cycles of violence do exist, both in fiction and real life. But the problem with most of the invocations of the cycles of violence is that they forget or ignore that the cycle starts somewhere. The mere semantics of calling the situation of Piltover versus the undercity the cycle of violence removes the agent and recipient of the violence. It's not like these two factions go to cyclical wars on equal grounds to fight for territory or resources. It's one side oppressing and brutalizing the other for generations, and the other side fighting back when pushed over the edge. But to name this a cycle would imply that the Zonids are in the wrong for resisting, that by resistance they enter the cycle and thus are equally to blame for perpetuating it. I'm sure that you or someone in your close proximity experience a situation of this sort. There's a child in school that is bullied or picked up upon, and nobody reacts to this. Pushed over the edge, the child fights back. The bully runs to snitch, and when the teacher comes to resolve the situation, they say, "I don't care who started it." Why don't you care who started it though? It does matter who started, because reactive violence is fundamentally different than just regular, unprompted violence. It brews out of someone's mistreatment and will never be on the same scale of moral wrongness as the initiatory violence, if it's morally wrong at all. Naming this a cycle, or obfuscating the reality of it by insinuating that it doesn't matter who started, works to absolve the culprit who started the cycle. And, in many instances, the party that is retaliating is met with more condemnation than the party who started it. That is because the violence of those stronger against the weaker ones rests safely in the status quo. In class society, we are conditioned from birth to accept inequalities as an inevitable part of life, and the violence of oppression is often something we become accustomed to or even apathetic to. But is it not violence for the police to raid homeless encampments? Is it not violence to force children to work in the toxic cobalt mines so that the privileged percents can get a new iPhone every year? Is it not violence to, in the pursuit of progress and technology, dump toxic wastes to the forgotten underground and put children into prisons without trial? To resist this violence in however capacity one has is not only expected, but also admirable. These people fight back not for personal benefits, but for the futures, lives, and well-being of themselves and their children. Arcane's first season shows us that all actions undertaken by Zonids are done directly in response to the brutalization they endured at the hands of Piltover, including Jinx's attack on the console. Jinx herself is a pretty peculiar example of someone who becomes a symbol almost by accident. To continue with the Hunger Games comparison, she is sort of like Katniss Everdeen. Katniss never intended to start a chain of reaction that led to the revolution of the districts, when she and Pita decided to take the poison berries so that Capital has no victor. Similarly, Jinx's attacks against Piltover are random and a result of her deranged state of mind, rather than actual revolutionary sentiment, but have you noticed one peculiar thing? Jinx never once targeted non-combatants. Her kill count against Piltover includes 6 enforcers on the bridge, Enforcer Marcus, all members of the violence apparatus of Piltover and therefore combatants, and 3 of the council members, representatives of the state and therefore, while not combatants, not civilians either. And now I know what you're going to say. But the council was approving Zaun's independence, and Jinx ruined any possibility of reconciliation by recklessly shooting that rocket. That is no doubt the way the writers of the show want you to read the situation, but how about we apply one good death of the author here? I don't believe that the council voting on Zaun's independence would have changed anything. The mere fact that Piltover's council is the one deciding on the matter of the liberation of Zaun shows the immense power they have over them. As Asata Shakur, a member of Black Liberation Army, once said, "Nobody in the world, nobody in history, has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them." Let me continue to apply the death of the author by making yet another bold statement. The reason why the council pinky promised to grant Zaun's independence in exchange of Jinx was not because they were earnest about it, but because they knew that Jinx's action will inspire the Zaunids to fight back in bigger numbers. And indeed, wouldn't you know, after she launches that attack, she becomes a symbol of resistance for the Zaunids. I individually like these councillors, especially Jayce and Mel, but it does not change the fact that they kinda had it coming. Believe it or not, even in the Geneva Conventions, it is written that occupied people have the right to resist. And this is what I mean when I say that Jinx didn't do anything wrong. Whenever she attacked Piltover, she targeted the enforcers and the ruling council of Piltover. I doubt Piltover ratified the Geneva Conventions, but according to the international law of our world, Jinx had every right to resist. And she did so not because she engaged in some cycle of violence for shits and giggles, but because she and her people had endured generations of oppression at the hands of Piltover. The only thing I could genuinely criticize Jinx for is that she's an adventurist, and her violence is aimless and does not serve some tactical purpose. The violence of the resistance should always have a specific aim rather than just blowing people up on a whim. But there was potential to change that. There was potential for Jinx to develop true revolutionary consciousness had she accepted herself as a symbol of Zaun. This would be especially meaningful considering that Powder felt like she was a nuisance, holding everyone back. She felt like her mere presence in other people's lives is a jinx, that she is destined to always hurt those she loves. To have the situation reversed like that, to have Jinx become a symbol of hope for not just her family, but to hundreds and thousands of Zaunids, would have been nothing short of beautiful. And it would also be a compelling contrast to Vi, who, by all intents and purposes, becomes a collaborator. Prior to the release of Season 2, co-creator Christian Link said, "What makes a difference is that now Silco is no more. For the first time, Jinx has to make her own decisions. There's no one there to tell her who she's supposed to be," which was a really big change. And for Vi, I think, suddenly feeling like an outsider in the undercity, and seeing also the undercity start to think of Jinx as the true Zonit, and the person that stands up to the aggression of the topsiders, is a difficult thing for Vi to deal with. But the show backs away from this to have her instead aid her oppressors in an invasion and fake her death for everyone's happiness. As it turns out, the solution to the Zone oppression was never to fight it back. It was for the oppressed to aid their bodies, lives, dreams and aspirations in service of the oppressor. Season 2 scapegoats Jinx as the person who has to end the cycle of violence she never started and never benefited from. Atone for her retaliatory violence she was pushed to commit by circumstances beyond her control, and in the process sacrifice her own personal happiness and fulfillment. The Zonit rebellion never happens. By the end of the story, the true enemy is Viktor and the Noxians. With the show being called Arcane, it was inevitable that the dangers of the Arcane would be the overarching conflict of the story. And that would be perfectly fine if only the Zone versus Piltover was resolved in any meaningful way. And the worst thing about it is that, in Season 1, we are shown that the oppressed rejecting the cycle of violence doesn't work. How else to describe the status quo Vander enforced? Following the failed uprising, he believed that the way forward was to negotiate and compromise with those who considered him lesser. As shown with his deal with Grayson, if his people are kept out of Piltover's streets, so will Grayson not send enforcers to the Undercity. But that status quo benefits Piltover far more than it ever did Zaun. They are the ones who live in squalor and misery as Piltover prospers at their expense. And if one incident involving destruction of property was enough for that deal to come undone, how shaky was it in the first place? Sorry for tying everything back to A Song of Ice and Fire, but I cannot help but see parallels to Daenerys Targaryen's tenure in Slaver's Bay. As she launches an anti-slavery campaign in Astapor, the chaos it results in causes her to seek a fragile peace and compromise with the slaving elite in fears of what more violence would entail. There we also see how the peace undoes all the progress she so desperately fought for. Slavery returns to Yunkai and Astapor, and all slave-based entities on the continent seek out her destruction. That is because, again, nobody in the world, nobody in history, has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who are oppressing them. It has to end with fire and blood. Zonists have a right and a duty to resist their oppression. They are not just as bad as Piltover if they fight back. They did not start the cycle, and them fighting back is not perpetuating it further. It is an attempt to end that cycle. The self-sacrifice of one mentally ill teenager who lost everything is no solution at all. It is baseless scapegoating, and worse yet, it confirms all of Jinx's fears. That yes, it would be better if she wasn't around. That yes, her death is what grants everyone happiness. While the unification of Zaun and Piltover to fight the common enemy is admirable on some grounds, it rings all that more hollow when you consider that Piltover gets scot-free of all the violence it unleashed on its sister city for hundreds of years. And Sevica becoming a representative of Zaun in the council means nothing, although again, I think the writers wanted us to believe otherwise. She has no allies in Piltover, and she is still looked down upon as a Zonit. The future of these two cities does not look bright at all. The ending of Arcane, although meant to be read as bittersweet, is just fully bitter. The moral of the story told in Season 2 is that the oppressed must give up their lives, hopes and dreams for nothing in exchange to end cycles they didn't start, and that the people of Piltover should get away with the violence they unleashed on them and reap benefits of treating them like cannon fodder. But once again, if someone hits you 10 times and you hit them back once, you're not as bad as them. You do not engage in the cycle of violence. You defend yourself. You try to end the cycle of violence unleashed on you. Irrespective of all this, I do not lie when I say that Arcane changed my life. It remains a beautiful story with beautiful characters and stunning visuals. I will always affirm that, irrespective of my issues with the direction it took in Season 2, it was a story worth telling. And not all of this happened because of malice. Aside from Christian Link though, I kinda don't fuck with him still. The real unsung heroes of all this are the animators, who sacrificed so much to create this masterpiece. They were allegedly sleeping at the studio and would not see their families for years to create Arcane. I saw people on Twitter claim that there was some possible disagreement between the writers and the animators, for the visuals do not always align with the story, and I suppose that this is what happens when you pair a French studio with an American writing team. Say what you want about the French, but they have revolution in their blood. They are going to throw bricks at the police whenever they are even slightly inconvenienced, whereas the Americans feel like revolution and revolutionary violence, or even being slightly inconvenienced due to protests and resistance, is worse than genocide. I am far from the only person to express disappointment at the series' direction, and one thing that kinda pisses me off is how people blame the audience for the show not meeting their expectations, and for having expectations that would never be sated. That is, no mainstream production would ever become this popular if it openly glorified the revolution and resistance, even violent resistance, but that is not our fault. The expectations were there because they were placed there. In complete isolation, Season 1 tells a story of oppression and resistance. It is only reasonable to expect a story to follow through with the elements it establishes. All art is political, and art is often made to be a tool of propaganda. I indeed can't name a mainstream production that would 100% follow through with the endorsement of resistance to oppression. Even The Hunger Games has its faults in that regard, with how by the end, the true villain of the story is one of the revolutionary leaders who just wants to grab the power for herself and is actually just as bad as them. But that does not mean that we should accept this state of things as a given. It does not mean that we should not demand better stories. And, most importantly, it does not mean that we should eschew the resistance in real life. When I say that Jinx did nothing wrong, I actually mean that she should have sent another rock. No, in all seriousness. While the only thing I could criticize Jinx for is the aimlessness of her violence, the impact of her actions does make her an agent of resistance. And the disappointment many fans felt with the show abandoning this plotline is fully warranted, and it did make the story suffer. It is also just tiring to see the same exact scenario play out in all the stories. Actually, the oppressed are just as bad as the oppressor if they resist. The narratives of cycles of violence don't work precisely because the oppressed resisting should not be seen as perpetuating cycles of violence, but as an attempt to end it for good. Well, I can only hope that the Noxus series is gonna be better. Thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share, so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. And remember, Phoenix rises from the ashes, and ashes always are on top.